I have a question for you. How should Q use scores to compute report card marks? We have the opportunity to choose the method Q will use to turn gradebook scores into report card marks. After much discussion, the report card committee brainstormed 4 possible options: traditional averaging and rounding, using midpoint values, averaging with modified rounding, and averaging with no automatic assignment of marks. By the way, for this presentation, score will be used in regards to gradebook assignments, and mark is used when referring to report card grades. And of course, next year we will only be allowed to enter scores of 1 through 4 into our gradebooks, but that's a whole nother discussion. So the first option is traditional averaging and rounding. This is the method we teach our students in Common Core State Standards Grade 3 Operations in Algebraic Thinking number 8. Let's say Sinead got 5 scores of 3 and 1 score of 2. These would be averaged to 2.83 and rounded up to produce a report card mark of 3. Sinead is happy, the teacher's happy, and all is right with the world. But what about Kellen? His scores were half 3s and half 2s, which of course averages to 2.5, which using this method also produces a report card mark of 3. This would make Kellen happy, but not the teacher, who may not think Kellen is actually proficient if he can only produce proficient work half the time. So it appears that this method may artificially inflate marks. The second option was recommended to conquer the problem of students like Sinead, whatever, who, because of one poor score, would not receive a mark of 3 without resorting to rounding. This method would use midpoint values similar to how marks are currently being calculated. In other words, assignment scores of 1 would be counted as a 1.5, a 2 as 2.5, and so on, and these values would be averaged. There would be no rounding of decimals, so if Sinead's average fell anywhere within 3.0 to 3.9999 whatever, her score would be the integer portion, or 3. Happy Sinead, and happy Kellen again, because all we've really done is shifted the computed averages up by 1/2. In other words, we were just sliding the normal cutoff from 2.5 up to 3 while also adding 0.5 to the computed average. Sinead is guaranteed her appropriate mark, but Kellen gets a higher mark than he may deserve, which is exactly what happens in the first method. This method merely adds a layer of complexity that does not result in scores that are more fair or accurate. I call method number 3 traditional averaging with modified rounding. There is some concern that this method artificially deflates scores because it moves the round up cutoff from 0.5 to 0.8. In other words, instead of being proficient only half the time, you must get scores of 3 at least 80% of the time, with the remaining 20% of scores no lower than 2. This is exactly what happens for Sinead. Who names these kids? Good for her, but this time, no free ride for Kellen. He gets the score he deserves, at least according to this teacher. The last option we suggested was pure averaging with Q giving no mark automatically. In this scenario, all gradebook scores within a domain or strand would simply be averaged, displaying the real number up to a few decimal places and allowing teachers to manually enter the final mark for the report card. While allowing teachers the fullest freedom possible, it would mean that we would be manually entering every single mark for every single strand or domain for every single student. Also, there is potential for increased subjectivity, since every teacher would have the freedom to determine their own cutoffs. For example, in Mr. Fuchsia's class, Sinead's 2.83 average could be reported as a 3, but in Mrs. Chartreuse's class, Sinead could get a 2 on her report card. Now, it's important to remember we always have the option to change any mark in any domain or strand for any of our students. It is our prerogative. We are trusted as professionals to make final determinations of report card marks based on all the data we've collected, not just the stuff we happen to have entered in gradebook. In other words, we can always change the mark that shows up, no matter which method we choose to have Q computed. With this fact in mind, a suggestion was made to have Q display the real number along with the computed mark in methods 1 through 3. In other words, Q could show us the mark of 3 along with the real average of 3.48 to allow us to choose to change the final marks or not. I would appreciate any input you have regarding your choice of method for having Q compute marks. I also welcome any questions you might have. Thanks for watching.